Good afternoon, colleagues. It's 12:03, and you're joining us again for another session of Staff Imbizo, where we engage on topical issues. And today, we're going to engage on a very critical matter, equally sensitive, the matter of gender-based violence. We took a view that it's important for us to engage as an organization on this matter based on a number of factors. And acknowledging our group CEO, Leila Forish, is on the line, and our guest for our guest speakers this afternoon. Colleagues, without any further ado, let me hand over to our CEO, Leila Forish.
Hi guys, thank you so much, DK, and welcome. It's so wonderful to chat to you, and I thought I'd maybe just introduce you to Delight. Delight is Tobakile, my helper's son, and he's down from Zimbabwe, and we've just got such awesome news. I just received a phone call literally as I was dialing in from a school down the road, and Delight's been accepted into the school, and so he's going to be able to stay with his mom and also study. Say hi, everybody. Hi. So I just thought I'd share that wonderful news with you, and it actually ties in. Thanks, my sweetheart. You can go watch the video. It actually ties in very, very neatly to the gender-based violence theme, because I think a lot of what we are facing in our country in the scourge starts at the very tender and young age, and education and insight and growth and development is crucial as a building block towards this problem. So for me, this is something that's very, very close to my heart, and for the first time since the start of the pandemic in March, the devastating impact of the lockdown on the already very severe sort of GBV problem has been exposed. And the government's GBV and Femicide Command Center, a call center to support victims of GBV, recorded 120,000 cases in the first 3 weeks of lockdown. And just weeks later in Pretoria, a similar call center was receiving up to 1,000 calls a day from women and children who were in abusive homes and seeking urgent help. My son, who is a psychologist, even in Australia, has remarked on the family-based violence and gender-based violence cases that has spiked up in his practice. So in South Africa, prior to the pandemic, femicide in South Africa was already 5 times higher than the global average, and the female interpersonal violence death rate was the 4th highest out of 183 countries listed by the World Health Organization in 2016. So evidence has emerged that suggests that cases of violence against women are increasing, and we see this from the number of cases that are being reported and the number of femicides. So while these are numbers and statistics, in reality, there are individuals sitting behind this: mothers, sisters, nieces, young kids, and all of those people have been robbed of their meaningful lives. And this is all owing to the increase in the GBV cases in our society. On the 4th of February this year, President Ramaphosa virtually launched a private sector-led multi-sectoral gender-based violence and femicide response fund, and that's aimed at supporting the implementation of the National Strategic Plan and the wider GBVF response in the country. And this strategic plan on gender-based violence includes things like accountability, coordination and leadership, prevention and rebuilding social cohesion, justice, safety and protection, response, care, support and healing, economic power, and research and information management. At the JSE, we are all abundantly aware that we had an employee who is standing accused of a GBV crime. The courts will take their, they go through the process. We can't get involved and we can't comment or prejudge. But as we have communicated previously, we did part ways with our employee following a very detailed HR process, and he's since been released from our employment. We have very clear plans to play an active role as citizens of South Africa to rid our country of GBV. And therefore, the change starts with each one of us in raising our voices, in bringing an end to the scourge of GBV. And so it's really my great honor and privilege to welcome Mbuyiselo Botha and Lisa Vetten to educate us more on GBV and how we as individuals can collectively, as a society, stand against GBV. So I'm really interested to hear what both have to say. And Mbuyiselo said that he was really very impressed that as a whitey, I'm able to pronounce his name. So welcome to both of you. Welcome, Lisa. And thank you for taking time out to spend with us on what I personally, and I know many and probably all of our staff feel so strongly about. I'm very aware that GBV is not just a concept out there, but actually something that is affecting certain of our staff within our organization, either directly or indirectly. And so this is not just a theoretical problem that we are aware of, but a real life experience that we need to guard against and manage against. So without further ado, I'll hand over, and really looking forward to what you have to say. Thank you. And thank you, DK, for organizing this.
Thank you, Leila. Without any delay, colleagues, let me introduce to you our two guests for this afternoon. Mbuyiselo, together with Lisa, have been instrumental in driving the discourse in the country on issues of gender-based violence. What we did earlier was to send you their profile on email, but I'll be very brief so that we can give them more time to engage us on the subject. Lisa is currently doing her research consultant at the University of Johannesburg in the Faculty of Humanities. She's doing her PhD. She's co-chairing the VETS Sexual Harassment Advisory Committee, and very instrumental in the last 25 years, playing a key role in the space of gender-based violence. Similarly, Commissioner Mbuyiselo Botha works for the Commission on Gender Equality, the CGE, very instrumental in the conversation regarding gender-based violence. He's played a key role in forming some of the forums, including the Men's Forum. And colleagues, without any further ado, let me hand over to Lisa, who will then take us through the first presentation, followed by Mbuyiselo, and then I'll come in and talk and give you 2 slides max, and then we'll go straight to the Q&A thereafter. Lisa and Mbuyiselo, sincerely appreciate your time from your busy schedules to engage us extensively on this matter. We're sincerely grateful for this opportunity. Thank you very much. Let me hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Donald. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Lisa, very well.
Okay, thank you. So what I want to do is pick up, I think, on some of the points that Leila was making about concepts and theory. Because in a way, the only way we can only think about something like gendered violence if we have a concept of gender and violence. That sounds very obvious. So I want to just go through a little bit what I mean when we talk about gender-based violence. What is the concept of it? Because our interactions and our actions that we take around the problem are only as good as our concepts and our thinking. So it really is important that we get our concepts and thinking right. So you'll see from my presentation, I've entitled it Gendered Relations of Violence. So I want to start by just briefly talking about what do I mean by relations. So relations are the way in which people or things are connected to each other. And what I want to suggest in the next slide is that one of the ways in which men in particular relate to the world, and the way they connect to the world, is through violence. So I'm going to be using murder statistics to illustrate that. But it's not just a question of how things are connected. It also looks at questions of associations between things, connections and their relevance. So I want to look a little bit more at that in my second slide, which is going to look at rape. Because one of the things I would like us to think more deeply about is what is it that shapes behavior? We spend a lot of time talking about norms. You must just change norms. You must change the way in which you bring up children. And those are all important, but they're not enough. And so when I get to the slide on rape, I want to explain to you a little bit about what else we need to think about around how norms and behavior are shaped. They don't occur in a vacuum. They have a context. There are conditions. And so I want to talk a little bit about those contexts and conditions when I talk about rape, because we have to address those as well. We can't just focus on ourselves. We need to look at how are we shaped in the world? What shapes us as people and as individuals? So just to begin with, the first slide I'm showing you here are the police's murder statistics over roughly the last 10 or 11 years. And you can see something very interesting going on. You can see them declining to hit a low point in 2011-12, and then to start increasing every single year thereafter. So what this is telling us is that there's a very worrying trend going on in South Africa, that murder is increasing and that it's increasing year on year, hence the question of a trend. So something long-term is going on here that we need to understand and that we need to reverse. And one of the first things we need to be asking about in terms of trends and understanding of murder is, are all people equally at risk? Does murder affect everybody in the same way? And the answer, as you're going to see from the next slide, is no, definitely not. And that's when gender becomes important, and why I'm speaking about gendered relations, because you can see that the way in which people relate to each other is very much informed by gender, whether or not they're male or female or have had masculine or feminine upbringings in the world. So if you look on the left-hand side, you'll see that, as that previous slide indicated, that 1993 was really the high point of murder in South Africa, when there were 78 per 100,000 people murdered in that year. You can see it had more than halved to 2012 to 30 per 100,000, and you can see something very equivalent for women. 24.7 per 100,000 women were murdered in 1999, and this had also roughly halved to about 12.9 in 2009. But with both, if you look at the figures on the right-hand side, you can see that that an increase has also been going on in relation to women. Now, there's quite a complex picture going on. You can see that on the extreme right are the total number of murders, and the percentage indicates the percentage of those murders which are women's. So you'll see women is on the left there. So what you can see from these figures is that the number of women's murders is kind of staying in more or less the same band. There's no you're not seeing massive increases and you're not seeing massive decreases. You're seeing a very stagnant picture here. You're not seeing much progress going on in relation to women. But you can see from the increases on the total increase on the right, that the increases we're talking about are in relation to men. That every single year, the increases we're seeing in relation to in the murder rates are predominantly in relation to men. So this is what I mean when I say violence is gendered. It matters if you're a man or a woman and your likelihood of being murdered. And you can see that and this is what I mean about talking about the way in which violence is used as a mechanism of relating, because clearly men are not just relating to women through violence, they are also relating to each other in very violent ways. And you can see that their rates of killing each other are probably sitting around about 5 times as often as they kill women. So we have so again, the other point about violence being gendered is it affects men and women differently. When men kill women, and you will sometimes find some women killing other women as well as other men, but we're predominantly talking about a masculine phenomenon here, whether it's in relation to men killing each other or to women, we're talking about a problem of masculine violence. So when men kill women, it tends to be under very different circumstances to which they kill each other. And typically for women, it's going to be in intimate relations. So roughly about half of all women are killed in their intimate relationships. That is not when women kill men, that is certainly not the same pattern. Men are very much more likely than women to be killed by strangers and to be killed in the streets rather than in their homes. So once again, the way in which men and women lead very different lives, the fact that women are predominantly supposed to be staying at home, maintaining the home, that's what makes it so dangerous for women. Even though we're living in a society that is changing, that is encouraging women to go out and leave homes, nonetheless, their home relations remain far more dangerous for them than they are for men. So if we are wanting to do something about homicide in South Africa, we have to look at its gender dimensions, the ways in which women die and the ways in which men die, and the fact that violence is clearly a very important way in which men relate to the world, to women and to each other. So that is my point really about trying to understand murder and the ways in which it is gendered. Sorry, let's get to the next slide. If we talk, I want to shift now to looking at homicide, at rape statistics. And here is where I want to talk about conditions and context. It's really important to understand that violence is not a static phenomenon. It happens under different kinds of conditions. And those are important to take into account because they start to tell us what it is that we need to do in order to reduce violence, and it starts to tell us where we need to pay attention because violence is increasing. So I've spoken already in relation to murder and made some points there that you can see some real shifts over time. And we have to understand what is driving those shifts. Clearly, gendered norms are very important, but something else is obviously acting on those norms in order to make them press more sharply or to aggravate them in some areas and not, but not in others. So this table here is again using the police's rape statistics, and we will, please, when you look at them, remember that a great deal of rape is not reported. So obviously this is not an accurate picture, but this table here is taken from the police's statistics that rank the 30 stations in South Africa that report the greatest number of rapes. You'll see what I've done is look at the figures for 2011 and 2019-20 in order to compare them. And you can see some very disturbing and rapid increases happening here. The most concerning, I think, are happening in Delft, Lusiki, and Diepsloot. So this is telling us that violence also has a geography. We need to understand the geography of what happens in particular places to increase violence. So I want to just zone in for a minute on Diepsloot. And that's because Diepsloot has had some behavior change programs introduced into it. Sonke Gender Justice ran their program that attempted to try to change men's norms in relation to violence. It was a well-designed study. It was also interesting because they'd run it in Bushbuck Ridge, which suggests it was promising. It did have the capacity to change, so then they to change behavior, and then they ran it in Diepsloot, and it did not have the same effect at all. In fact, it had the very unfortunate consequence of, in some instances, making more violent men even more violent. So what are the conclusions we take from that? Firstly, that clearly it's very important to focus on norms and behavior, but to go back to my original point, norms have a context. We have to look at what is that context. What is it that shapes and makes worse gendered norms of inequality, or the incentive to use violence as a way of dealing with your difficulties in the world, as a way of relating to the world and to the women and men in it. And I think one of the interesting findings around Diepsloot was that men who used violence, because they also had a control group, men who were not violent. So it's very useful because you can start to compare what might the difference be. And one of the and some of those differences were in relation to the men who were very violent, was that many of them had been going hungry on quite a regular basis. They had fairly high levels of depression, that they had experienced a great deal of childhood adversity. In fact, they had probably grown up under circumstances in which the primary way in which people relate to them as children was through violence. So having learned that as adults, that was the way in which they continued to relate to the world. I mean, Diepsloot is not far from where we sit in the JSE. And as you will note, is an area that suffers a great deal of deprivation in terms of a lack of housing and a lack of many other amenities. So what that tells us is that we need to look at people's social conditions, what do they have access to, the quality of their housing, their food, etc., etc., if we want to try and do something about violence. So I'm going to end there. I think I've probably gone over my 10 minutes, but what I've tried to sketch for you here is the way in which violence is used as a way to relate men and women to each other, and also what it is, some of the social conditions that might make it very much more likely that violence is used as a form of relating in the world in ways that are very gendered. So what I hope you've been able to see from this is that we need to focus both on the norms that individuals hold, but also to look at the social conditions which might aggravate and make the likelihood of acting on negative norms towards women much greater. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for sharing high-level the stats and the linkage between relations and some of the key norms. Let's hand over to Mbuyiselo Botha. Mbuyiselo, over to you.
Well, thank you, Donald. I hope you're able to hear me, Donald. Well,
yeah, we can hear you clearly, Mbuyiselo. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I just want to thank Lisa for a comprehensive presentation. And then thank you, Donald, in particular, for putting this together. I just want to talk about, and maybe go on what Lisa was talking about. My presentation is that it's about men. We will not be able, colleagues, to do anything about GBV femicide unless we in fact in a very more conscious way and way to deal with how men are raised. And I want to talk about, I call them about 5 Ps. I want us this morning to look at, what is patriarchy? A system that tells us that we were created, we're a gift from men. Unless we, at an earlier age, unless, the CEO, Leila, unless Leila, we are able, that boy at that age, to shift, his thinking, unless we create an environment where he begins to question patriarchy, that what makes him to be, or to consider himself as a gift to mankind, until we are able as a society, and Johannesburg Stock Exchange would play a critical role in the workplace, where men begin to talk about these uncomfortable truths as to, we as men, as beneficiaries of patriarchy, how do we then begin to change patriarchy? Because here's a system, and Bell Hooks talks about patriarchy as a system that cripples men emotionally. It's a system that says when men are hurting, it says, no, you're not hurting. It's a system that when men are vulnerable, it says, no, you're not vulnerable. So I want to argue this morning, or this afternoon, colleagues, that Leila, Donald, and your colleagues, we would only be able to deal with violence. And when you talk about GBV, violence against women, and then femicide, we'll only be able to deal with it when we begin to have these uncomfortable conversations about us as men being beneficiaries of patriarchy. So, that's the first P that I want to talk about, that JSE, in particular men, because look, there is no system, there's in the world a system that when makes men who are beneficiaries, but also that it is toxic to our well-being. It is men who drive recklessly. It is men who drink alcohol excessively. It is men who die young. It is men who commit suicides. And all of these things, all of them are predicated on what patriarchy has done to us from an early age. And in all languages, when you're an African, you're told that when you're a young Zulu, you're told that clean, when you are Xhosa, a young Xhosa man who comes from the mountain, you are told, whether you've been to the mountain or not, but the message is the same, that you really have to stand up for yourself as a man, and you must lead and be a leader. But also, I want to move on and talk, the importance of us questioning and dealing with patriarchy, which is aligned to what culture teaches us, what religion teaches us, I mean, what corporate world teaches us. I mean, it is now it's becoming a norm. Whilst we are still a long way to go, and this is the work we do as a commission here at Chapter 9 institution on our on our investigative work, where it would be unheard of to have Leila as a CEO, because the norm has been that men are inherently endowed with these skills, with these talents of being CEOs, of being chartered accountants, and then women are in fact placed to do the nanny work, become human resources, however important it is. But women, the society is structured in such a way that women are not nannies at home only, but they continue to be nannies at work. So patriarchy is critical. How we raise, how we socialize the boy child, but also the girl child. What are messages we're saying? So I want to say this morning that let's deal with patriarchy. But also patriarchy, we have these privileges. We have power. We have the politics of the penis, where the penis is used by us men as a weapon of war. When you have rape, it has nothing to do with sex. It has a lot to do with subjugation. It has a lot to do with oppression. We use, the P of the penis as a way to subjugate, oppress women. And we must begin to talk about how do we then understand, what is being romantic, what is loving? How do we, in a very more nuanced way, how do we discuss the toxicity around the penis, that the politics of the penis? How do we deal with power? The power, and how do we lastly deal with the privileges that we have as men, unearned privileges? Unearned privileges. We are at the top because we are males, nothing else. We are at the top because we were born males. And these are things, but these are things that the 5 P's I talk about: patriarchy, power, privilege, power of the penis, these are all the things that as men we need to talk about them. And if you look at it, all of them have one thing in common: they make us be violent, because you are raised to believe that, look, you are not allowed to show any other emotion other than anger. There is a badge of honor when you are angry. When there's a badge of honor when you feel you dominate other men, you dominate women, until and unless we begin. And that's what Johannesburg Stock Exchange would play a greater role, where you create programs for men to converse among themselves, for men to talk about issues pertaining to patriarchy, to power, to privilege, to their penises. Well, we would have these uncomfortable and unconventional discussions. And I'm happy that, from the Commission's point of view, that this is the start of opening up. How do we in the workplace, those men that are senior in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, how do they use their positions for sexual harassment? How does Johannesburg Stock Exchange, do you have policies, do you have programs? And maybe this is the start of a long journey where you begin to look at your own policies. Do you have a sexual harassment policy? Does every Dick, Tom, Harry, or Salamina in the workplace understands, or is it just there gathering dust? Do you have, other than the sexual harassment policy, do you have a gender policy? Or you would only wake up as one of your staff members, former staff members, Shoba is accused, then you go back and say, but it's a wake-up call, we need to do something about it. I think that engaging men is going to be a sacrosanct program. If JSE has to impact its employees, men must begin to talk, and to talk about themselves, to talk about their own pains, to talk about their own upbringing, to talk about how culture unfairly gives them these opportunities, how power, how being male gives them power, how patriarchy is in fact an oppressive system. How do we, Donald, you and I at Johannesburg Stock Exchange, ensure that we men begin in their offices, I mean, the CEOs that are part of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, how do we then engage them in asking them these questions about sexual harassment policies, about programs that would ensure that men get into substantive dialogues about themselves, that men begin to shift their narrative, that men begin to talk about not only rugby, not only Morocco silos, not only about sundowns, how men begin, not only about cricket, how do they talk about, I mean, things that lead to them being violent, I mean, sexual dysfunction in relationships where women are blamed. I mean, and using our power to ensure that in the workplace, we in fact oppress women. Sexual harassment problems that most of us are in charge of, that don't see light of day, that women are not able to fully function to their abilities because of the impact adversely of what sexual harassment does to them. And I think that, I hope that, as I said, it's a start where you would have within Johannesburg Stock Exchange, Leila, you would have men would have programs where once in a month, once in 3 months, men begin together at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and talk about the things that in fact are happening in their own lives. But also, how will Johannesburg Stock Exchange ensure that these programs don't end up at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, but they go outside? I mean, the employees who live in Sandton, the employees who live in Tembisa, how does a Johannesburg Stock Exchange ensure that it supports these programs? How does it make sure that it establishes in different programs? And let's just talk about, I mean, the social settings. How does Johannesburg Stock Exchange ensure that it improves the quality of the quality of work and the quality of their well-being of the areas that surround them? How do they make sure that these areas become humanly habitable? I want to say that the start is these conversations, but these conversations must not go on for the sake of them going on, but they must in fact have time frames, but they must also have the outcomes. What is it that you want to do? I hope that what Johannesburg Stock Exchange is not a pain in the flesh. It's not this expedient type of engagement. Like in most cases, you would have these conversations during the 16 days, during August, during the 8th of March. And this is most companies, government entities, they do these dialogues because it's a ticket box. You don't feel good that, look, as a Johannesburg Stock Exchange, we celebrated World AIDS Day. As a Johannesburg Stock Exchange, we looked at August the 8th. We had ribbons, we had lunch for our females, the achievers. But are those, whilst important they are they substantive in changing the gender norms, in changing how men think about themselves, how men think about women in the workplace, in their own private spaces? And I want to say that, Leila, you have a bigger job in front of you, yourself as well, Donald and your colleagues, in ensuring that once we challenge men, we also give them tools to deal with their own frustrations. We give them spaces for them to articulate and to seek help. Does the Johannesburg Stock Exchange have your wellness program? If it does, who attends? Is it only women? Do men go? Why don't men access the services? Is it because how they are packaged? Now, all of these things could go a long way in Johannesburg Stock Exchange addressing patriarchy and its actually attendant consequences. Addressing, I mean, power, addressing privilege, addressing the politics of the toxicity of the penis. And I want to end by saying that I'm hopeful that you'll be able to use the services of the Commission for Gender Equality. And let me end by, in fact, saying that as a Chapter 9 institution, we call the CGE in all the 9 provinces. It can only be effective as long as we use, and we must be grateful to our forebears, people who thought as they were crafting our constitution, the importance of creating the Public Protector, the Auditor General, the Commission for Gender Equality, the CRL, I mean, all of the Human Rights Commission. And it's for us to be grateful to those who came before us, that they made it possible that we do have institutions that would support, enhance, and deepen our democracy. Here's a toll-free number that, colleagues, please write it down, that you could use and make sure that the Commission for Gender Equality can assist in ensuring that it offers training. It can ensure that you have a gender, policy. You have a sexual harassment policy, and I hope that as you engage the Commission, this would not be done just to tick a box. We have a toll-free number that I would like to share with you, and I hope that you'll be able to make use of it. Our toll-free number is 0800 00 709. Let me repeat it. It's 0800 00 709. Toll-free number, the Commission for Gender Equality. As to our contacts, Donald and the colleagues do have. And I want to end by saying that this is a groundbreaking initiative from Johannesburg Stock Exchange, because we know that you had people marching to your offices during the shutdown. And the main reason that people, women in particular, marched there was this era of silence from the business world. That the business world, when women are in pain, there is this perception, real or imagined, that the business world talks about the bottom line. The business world looks the other way. And the business world is focused on what is in it for us. And I hope that we're able, Lisa and I, able to challenge you and say that it can't be business as usual. And COVID has actually put into sharp focus some of these glaring inequalities in our country. And I hope that Donald, Leila, you'll be able to make sure that we don't do this to tick a box. Let me end there and say once again, to you in particular, Donald, thank you for inviting us. And I hope that this is a start of a long journey in engaging men, not to condemn men, not to vilify men, but to say to men that if we question all of these things I spoke about, the possibilities that we can journey. Because look, Donald and colleagues, Leila, there's something in it when men find their humanity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mbuyiselo, and thank you very much, Lisa, as well, for sharing high level some of the key elements we should be considering as we engage in the subject henceforth. Before we ask colleagues to send us question and answers, questions for the Q&A, we just put 3 slides which highlight some of the key things we're currently doing. And thanks, Mbuyiselo, for the call to action. At the JSE, we believe that we've done a number of things, but the view really is that it's not enough. We need to continue to invest extensively in this space. I'll just highlight some of the key things that we've done to date. We have a very clear code of ethics that prohibits gender-based violence, and in the process, sexual harassment, catcalling. We're committed to gender equality and diversity broadly, and this is through our broader strategy of transformation through Implement Equity and BEE. We're working with Shamila in the Sustainability Division to drive the UN Sustainability Goals, predominantly driving gender neutrality. Hence, we came up with the gender neutral parental leave as an example. And we're very clear that we affirm the rights of colleagues in the LGBTQ community and freedom of expression at the JSE. However, there's a lot that we still have to do and so forth. So one is that we are participating, Leila together with Vuyo are participating in the President GBVF Fund campaign. We are in the process of developing a gender strategy under the leadership of Vuyo, which will look at the broader strategy around advocacy. The second part of the strategy will talk to the internal programs that we intend running at the JSE in advancing the conversation and the discourse around gender-based violence. We intend establishing a gender forum inside of the JSE with the view of inviting colleagues who are equally passionate about engaging in the subject extensively to contribute towards developing programs and plans to support colleagues inside of the JSE. We are in the final stages of our gender-based violence policy, which we're taking to EXCO in June. And the policy broadly will look at 2 aspects. the employee support program we should be putting in place as the JSE. Amongst that includes training and development, webinars that will be running and so forth as part of empowering colleagues with the necessary knowledge and information they need to be able to deal effectively with GBV in the workplace, in the community, and broadly to impact society positively. The other part which is very critical is the line manager enablement. How does a line manager who has a colleague who is in a GBV situation, how do we support that colleague as a line manager? So we want to ensure that we arm our managers with the right technical knowledge on how to deal with gender-based violence, but more importantly, enable them with a support program for them to be able to support our colleagues at a coalface. For example, time off to be able to deal with issues such as going to court, getting a protection order, and all those other things. These are practical things that ordinarily line managers will not know how to deal with those. When you have a colleague who's in a situation of a gender-based violence, but have to go back home to the same perpetrator, what do we do in that particular instance? How can you support as a line manager? So we need to think broadly and beyond just the current parameters of saying, call ICAS. And it's part of us a call to campaign to say all of us at the JSE must play an active role in ensuring that we stem the tide on gender-based violence. So all of these initiatives that we intend putting together will help us to get to that. Sita, please go to the next slide. Hi, Sita, you can move on to the next slide. So the other part, which I think is very important, colleagues, is normalizing seeking help, and at the same time, normalizing offering help without stigmatizing. The biggest challenge that we're sitting with is that a number of colleagues are in challenging situations, but because they don't feel comfortable and they don't have the psychological safety to believe that they will be treated fairly, they will not be mocked, and so forth, and they end up dying in silence or getting involved, keeping quiet in very, very difficult circumstances. What we're asking really is that line managers, HR, colleagues, when colleagues come out asking for help, let's make sure that we assist them with a deep sense of care, empathy, and support. Let's make sure that we treat with the information they're sharing with us with the highest level of confidentiality. With the ICAS program, which we're currently running, we believe that program is sufficient to provide first-level support. However, there's more support that is required. So the other thing as well that we're considering is having a place of safety to save life. And I think that's very important. One of the things we're seeing, like I've indicated earlier, is victim of gender-based violence going back home to the very same perpetrators. And in the process, sometimes they tend to lose their life. And I think it's important that we come up with ways and programs of supporting, and things such as alternative accommodation temporarily while they're thinking of other avenues of how to get out of a GBV situation. And where line managers are stuck and so forth, we're saying get involved with your director. Myself and Leila will look at other alternatives of support. We cannot have a situation where we become aware of a particular situation and we never offer support, and then we are in the process losing life as well. So those are some of the programs that we're putting in place. So if I can go to the next slide, please. And then these are the contact numbers which will circulate after the webinar through the JSE for you. And this will send it to Iqbal and our JIS colleagues as well at JIS. So these are all the numbers. If you need support and so forth, this is the first port of call. And the most critical one is our ICAS helpline. They will tell us in instances where we need to get involved. However, they maintain high levels of confidentiality. They don't get involved in the nitty-gritties of the issue. They will indicate to us that we have a potential challenge here. Is there any way that they can engage and request your approval to let us know? And in the process, we'll come in and support and provide the guidance and support required. Sika, you can go to the next slide, which is pretty much us asking for two things. One is that we want to start the gender forum at the JSE, which Vuyo and I will lead as part of a deeper conversation and discourse at the JSE, come up with programs such as training, webinars, and so forth to help drive the conversation around gender-based violence. And if we have suggestions, input, and ideas on what we can do around the issue of gender in the broader strategy, and again, specifically on gender-based violence, please feel free to drop Vuyo and I a note on the emails that I've indicated here. Without any further ado, I want to open for Q&As so that we can interact with our speakers today and ask them questions so they can help us in understanding some of the issues, and more importantly, impart us with knowledge and skills we can use as we get back into our homes and respective communities. Sihle, let me go straight into the Q&A here. There's a lot of questions that came through. Sihle, if you can just do me a favor, maybe ask the first few questions while I'm trying to call it down, to bring the questions. I can't see them at this point.
No problem. We've got the first one from Millicent Khadebe. Delightful news indeed. Good luck and all the best. Oh no, this was for regarding Leila. Good luck and all the best for the board. There are currently no questions. We'll
I
just
see
wait.
Yeah, I see some questions came through here. Maybe if you can bring in Mbuyiselo together with Lisa back on the line, Sihle.
Okay, Lisa and Mbuyiselo, display your webcam again for us and unmute yourself.
Thank you, Lisa. I think Mbuyiselo is still maybe activating his camera. I can start with the first question. We have 10 minutes, so I just want to make sure that we use the time just to address some of the questions that are coming through. So the issue, Mbuyiselo, is that, and Lisa, maybe please weigh in as well on that, is the issue of most men saying, I'm not an abuser, and therefore I don't have to get involved in the process. And the question is very structured. It talks about bystanders. We have most men that are bystanders in the process, even though they're not abusers themselves. What can we do differently? And what's your message to us as men at the JSE? And I know Mbuyiselo spoke about that extensively, but the question has been asked again differently.
Well, thank you to the colleague who asked the question. I think the bystander is dangerous in the sense that it then perpetuates or fuels violence, but also is that there is this notion that I can't get involved. It's not my business. It's a domestic matter. I think one of the things that we should do, or JSE should do is this type of training, this mobilization, especially that you can do a lot of things. One of them, other than you obviously, I don't want to promote people hurting themselves or playing that we must discourage it. I mean, there are ways that you can do. One of them is you can support a survivor. You can support the survivor by doing two things or even more, by asking, what can I do? How can I help? You know, and it's important that you operate from hearing from the survivor or the victim, that you don't impose as to what you think is the right action. But getting involved is critical in that you're not only saving yourself, you know, but you're also creating an environment that would reject violence. So I'm just saying that, Donald, to answer your question and colleagues directly, is that support the survivor, journey with the survivor, and whilst being careful that you do not intervene in instances where you know that the likelihood that you may be hurt yourself, you may be killed yourself. I mean, we know in Soweto recently, one of the, very prominent star in the previous generation, you know, he at the Shepin, he stood up and said, you can't do this in my name. You can't treat this woman in this manner. And guess what? He got killed. So I'm saying, whilst we should discourage the bystander syndrome, we say that there are other means, ways of supporting, of getting involved, of stopping the violence without putting yourself in harm's way. You could call the police anonymously. You could ensure that you're in a safe space. But also, I hope that within the workplace, colleagues, when I know that, but Mbuyiselo, the catcalling, I mean, the objectification of women, the sexualizing women, their bodies, where I know that this individual sends pornographic pictures of women, could unsolicited, could send a penis, could send a vagina. It's important to emphasize that I have a duty to stand up, that you will not do this to debase, to demean, disrespect women in my name. I have to stand up. We must, Donald, we must call each other out as men. That's the
Sure.
only way that we'll be able to stop.
Thank you. Lisa, there's a question for you. It talks about, you have indicated high level the statistics regarding where we are as a country and so forth around gender-based violence, but the issue of children who are involved or who are victims ultimately, you have not addressed it. Can you just give us a view on that as well?
Yes, I look predominantly at adults, but some of those figures for rape and homicide will have included children as well. I think it's very important to understand and look at children and pay more attention to them. There is just so much research that tends to suggest that for children who are, sorry, I'm just going to put my webcam on, that children who are exposed to violence are at greater risk of being victims and perpetrators as adults. We're not saying that they always will, but the risks are greater because they've been, as you may remember my saying, that the primary way in which people have related to them has been through violence. So that means that they don't have a greatly wide repertoire of behaviors to draw from when they get into difficult situations. So it's really important that we do look at what is the quality of children's lives in South Africa, and it really isn't great. If we look at the number of children who live in poverty, which is often related to the fact that many of them are living with single mothers who are the poorest households in the country, we should be paying much more attention to that, because that's certainly that whole complex of childhood adversity, which is broader than just questions of violence, but the questions of difficult living circumstances, not enough to eat, that's all part of adversity. But I think we should also not look at questions of children who might be in better social circumstances, but who are not paid a lot of attention to, who are emotionally neglected. So we've also got to look at those dimensions that might not physically show themselves, but are nonetheless other ways in which it's communicated to children that they are not valued, that they are not wanted, and which doesn't give them very effective role models as adults to communicate concern for others. I think a last question to also be thinking about for all those who like to hit their children is that very often, you know, I can think about this from my own childhood, being smacked and told, this hurts me more than it hurts you, or I'm only doing this because I love you. And I think we should think very hard about that, because what you're basically telling a child is that pain and love go together. Being hurt is a sign of loving somebody. That's a really terrible message to give, and it really does set you up for later abusive relationships as an adult. So, I mean, I think those are just some thoughts around thinking about children and violence.
Lisa, another question that just came through is as a line manager, at this point, I have not been trained on how to support an employee who's in a GBV situation. What can I do while waiting for the training to be conducted at a later stage?
There would be a couple of things that you can do. Is the one thing is contact an organization. I've heard you speak about a shelter. So it might be worth contacting the National Shelter Movement, for example. They have a lot of great written materials around domestic violence, which could be very useful resources. There are other organizations like Power, People Opposing Women Abuse. So there's a lot of very helpful online material developed by organizations, which you could read and familiarize yourself with. You know, you could also, you know, admittedly an hour is not enough, but you could possibly continue these kinds of conversations by inviting some of those organizations to come and speak to you. And I mean, I think we should never forget that all of us have the capacity to be understanding, kindly human beings who can listen to each other. So try to draw on those skills that you have when listening to somebody, because sometimes all somebody would really like is someone to listen to them. They don't want someone to take over their problem, to tell them what to do, to insist that they leave right now, or to rescue them from their situation. Sometimes they would just like somebody who will listen and help them to talk through, think through, and problem solve and come to an idea, to something that they can live with. And you don't always need a degree in psychology to do that. Here, it's really, I think, activate your own skills that you practice every day with your friends and family, I hope. When you listen to staff and employees, and as I said, take what you can learn online in order to help people think through what it is that they need to be doing and put them in touch with help. You don't have to do everything. There are a lot of organizations out there. You can be the conduit to help and to refer them elsewhere in the meantime.
Lisa, to that last point, there's a question that talks to, I just don't know how to help, or how can I help someone, or if I identify someone who is in a GBV situation, how do I go about helping that individual? I think it links to the initial response you've given about exercising the most basic element of care, empathy, and so forth, which you exercise with your family and friends. The other one came, thanks Mbuyiselo and Lisa for gracing us with your presence. Thank you for the JSE for this great initiative. As JSE men, let's all contribute to fight against GBV. Let us be positive and influence, and let us be positive influence in our community. Sidley, I'm not seeing a lot of the questions coming through there. Let's see, there's another one coming up. How does a man who's being abused handle the situation if a line manager tells him to grow a pair of, he just put it in exclamation mark and take it? I don't know, maybe you want to address that as well while Sidley scrolling down on all the other questions.
Should I go?
Go ahead.
Or,
Go ahead, Mbuyiselo.
well, I wanted to say, maybe Lisa, you also add. I mean, it is wrong, but also it has a lot to do with that manager. As he, I mean, all that he's saying, his frame of reference is patriarchal. So it is wrong, and that's why then you would need an in-depth training, training that could go deeper about why is it wrong when men are feeling pain that we look the other way. I mean, and this is how we promote patriarchy. I mean, there were instances, I'm not sure whether they're still happening. There were instances where men who have been violated go to police stations and they would be turned away. But not only be turned away, there would be an element of shame, you know. And I mean, I remember many years ago in Davidton, one man had just been battered by the wife physically, and he went to the report to police station, and he was told that, you know what, go back and kill that dog. And guess what? That's exactly what he did. So that is why police need training. I mean, it's almost what, 23, 24 years. I mean, 1998 Domestic Violence Act, but you still have pockets of men and women in blue who have no clue about it. But also coming back to a question, in the workplace, you're going to have to need a lot of engagement, conversation, training, cajoling, persuading. I mean, and that means for everybody else. You see, the tendency with in the workplace is that this gender training is needed by the lowest. There are few managers, few executives who take time to train themselves. No wonder you have this attitude, because you see, there are men who are of the view that, well, what do I need to be trained on? And this is more prevalent in your higher echelons of power. People think, you see it in government, you see it in private sector, people think that, look, I don't need this. I mean, with all my qualifications and what, and these are the people who are, in fact, who are who have to deal with sexual harassment, but they're managers, they're line managers, but the attitude is that, what is this gender? We gave them Beijing. What is it? What do they want? You know, yeah.
Thank you, Mbuyiselo. I'm concerned about our time. We're at 1 o'clock, and there's a lot of comments coming, obviously indicating, thank you for the initiative. And maybe before we close, and maybe ask Leila to close as well, if she's still on the line, and I know she has time constraint, is that Mbuyiselo and Lisa, thank you very much for taking the time to help us set the conversation in motion at the JSE around gender-based violence. This is not the first and the last. This is the first of many engagements that we want to curate at the JSE to engage extensively so that all of us can play an active role in helping the government and making sure that our homes, our communities, and the broader country at large is safe, from one person to a corporate, and we hopefully that this will snowball into other corporates taking a clue on what the JSE is doing in this case, and moving forward and making sure that we get the whole corporates to play an active role, and in the process can get society to engage extensively on this matter. But more important, to change norms and change the behaviors, which are the things that I've highlighted. The social impact, the norms, and some of the things that are highlighted are those things the power of patriarchy, the privilege, the power of the pennies, and all of those things that you highlighted today are the things that we should take heed of as men and as colleagues as we go back and educate one person and so forth. Leila, may I please ask you to close if you're still on the line? Hi, colleagues. Leila has a 1 o'clock, so I'm not so sure if she's still on the line. If not, let me take this time and this opportunity to thank both Lisa together with Mbuyiselo for their time and for getting us going on this conversation. Like I've said, we're setting the conversation in motion at the JSE. We're starting to engage in some of these things. We have a number of initiatives that we've lined up. We'll appreciate your participation, your contribution in terms of suggestions, recommendations, and ideas on how we can get the conversation on gender-based violence and gender broadly at the JSE going. And in the process, build programs and policies that will support and enable you so that you can contribute towards a safer South Africa. So thank you very much. Thanks to everyone. Thanks, Mbuyiselo. Thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you, Sihle. Thank you very much, Matlaku, for curating all of this program. We sincerely appreciate it, and thanks for your time. Iqbal and the colleagues at JIS will circulate the information back to you through the marketing team as well, so that you have all the info that we've provided today and so forth. So thank you. Thanks to everyone. Thank you very much, and have a great day.